The Houthis just crossed a line. They didn't strike Israel, they went after a US aircraft carrier. On March 17, 2025, the USS Harry S. Truman, a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered carrier, was sailing through the Red Sea. That's when the Houthis launched a swarm of drones and ballistic missiles directly at it. Their target wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol. But here's the twist: none of the attacks hit. The US Navy didn't flinch. And now the Houthis are learning the hard way what happens when you test American steel. So what actually happened during the strike? And what would have happened if even one of those drones made it through? Let's break it down and show you what the US Navy is really capable of. First, let's start with the extent of the attack. The Houthis claim they launched 3 separate barrages of drones and other long-range ordnance at the aircraft carrier within 48 hours between March 16th and 18th. However, the US Navy didn't have to scramble because it saw the attack coming. According to defense officials, the Truman strike group successfully intercepted over a dozen drones headed its way, leaving the carrier and its escorts completely unaffected by the Houthi barrage. So what happened? The most likely scenario is that the attacks simply missed. A US defense official suggested the Houthi strike landed over 100 miles off target, plopping harmlessly into the ocean. But the Houthis weren't deterred by these failures, which begs the question: what would happen if the militant group actually managed to correctly launch and guide their long-range munitions toward a US aircraft carrier? So let's create a hypothetical scenario to showcase how exactly the US Navy's largest ships can defend themselves. Now, to be fair, such a scenario may have already happened, as the group reportedly attacked the Truman again on April 1st and 2nd. But what could happen next, or already has, would send a clear message to anyone who might even consider testing American steel in the Red Sea. The USS Harry S. Truman is cruising through the southern Red Sea, now operating under the leadership of Destroyer Squadron 50, Desron 50, the US Navy unit tasked with maintaining maritime security as part of Operation Prosperity Guardian. This multinational mission patrols one of the most volatile shipping lanes on Earth, where tensions have been steadily rising. Houthi drone and missile attacks have surged, especially in response to a string of US airstrikes targeting their launch sites in Yemen. It's the evening of April 1st. Suddenly the Truman's radar systems detect a launch or incoming ordnance like drones or missiles. A cohort of Iranian-designed drones, most likely Samad-3s, long-range loitering munitions capable of flying between 700 and 1,100 miles at relatively low speeds, is approaching the Truman strike group's defensive perimeter. Despite their low speed and large radar signature, they hope to exploit the nighttime conditions and radar clutter to get closer than usual. This would negate the drone's lack of stealth capabilities and possibly improve their accuracy. The aircraft carrier's defensive systems immediately spring into action, with sailors scrambling to their stations. However, the attempt at subterfuge ultimately fails, as the aircraft carrier uses an AN/SPS-48 radar with an effective range of just slightly under 300 miles. If this radar fails to detect a drone, the long-range 2D air search radar AN/SPS-49V would likely serve as a backup. With an effective range of over 200 miles, this radar would give the carrier plenty of time to react. Regardless of which radar on board picks up the signal, within moments the Truman's Combat Information Center would light up. Aegis systems on the escort vessel, like the destroyers following the carrier information, would confirm the targets and recheck their trajectories. From then on, it would be all hands on deck to man the battle stations, as officers would bark orders throughout the ships. In the background, the Truman's close-in weapons systems would be brought to ready status, standing by to engage. Spoiler alert, a drone might chip the paint, maybe, but it won't have much luck getting through the armor. In fact, there are 4 likely scenarios for how a drone might fail to actually make a dent in an aircraft carrier. We'll showcase these on each drone separately. The first drone would veer off slightly thanks to its signal being jammed or spoofed by the electronic warfare suite aboard an escort cruiser. It would go down well before reaching weapons range. This is by far the most likely scenario, as the reports from the US military suggest that the actual drones were off by at least 100 miles, which lends credibility to the idea that their navigational systems were shot down or simply ineffective. Now let's say the second drone flew lower, hugging that sweet spot just above the sea, riding the edge of radar clutter trying to stay hidden. This would make it more difficult to spot. The 2D radar wouldn't be able to provide an accurate register of its altitude. However, the Nimitz carriers are also undergoing retrofitting for a more advanced 3D air search radar, the Spy 6V2. It's unclear whether the system is currently installed on the Truman, but it's likely that its stock 3D radar could get a lock if the drone gets sufficiently close, given its relatively low speed of only about 200 miles per hour at most. When the drone does get within striking distance, the carrier's defense systems would truly start up. The Truman's Phalanx CIWS, nicknamed Sea Whiz, would roar to life. The 6-barreled, radar-guided Gatling gun spits out 4,500 rounds per minute. That's 75 rounds a second, a literal wall of lead. Tracer rounds would streak through the night like fireworks on overdrive. Seconds later, mid-air detonation would occur as the drone would be turned into a flaming ball of shrapnel, raining harmlessly into the ocean. This would be unlikely to deter the Houthis, as there would be more drones incoming. In fact, actual reports from the militia itself claim they have launched hundreds of drones at the US Navy. These drones would likely have no impact. Guided missile destroyers, the USS Stout or DDG-55 and the USS Jason Dunham DDG-109, acting as part of the Truman's screen, would immediately spring into action as they possess more apt aerial response capabilities. The armament in question, SM-2 interceptors, fast, long-range, precision-guided missiles designed to vaporize airborne threats. Each SM-2 has a range of between 100 and 200 miles, depending on the launch platform, which would give the US Navy more than enough time to target and take down slow-moving targets like the Samad-3. But let's say a drone somehow miraculously skimmed past the radar detection of the guided missile systems and avoided the destroyer's armaments. The Truman would have one more trick up its sleeve. The carrier's second CIWS mount would activate, belching a curtain of 20mm tungsten rounds. It would shred the drone instantly with pretty much no remains to track as it sinks to the bottom of the Red Sea. Using a guided interceptor makes sense when dealing with threats that the US knows can actually damage a carrier, something moving fast and having enough explosive power to level a city block, like a ballistic missile or a more advanced guided drone. For those, there's also some financial merit to using an interceptor, as each of those missiles cost a few $1 million a pop. For a cheap drone moving at speeds that are relatively easy to detect by US military standards, using an interceptor is just a waste of top-grade defensive systems. The CIWS mount is much cheaper to operate while having an extreme effect on drones. And these are considered some of the worst-case scenarios that involve slow-moving drones attacking the US Navy. In reality, most of them would never make it out of Yemeni airspace. A US Navy EA-18G Growler, already airborne as part of the Truman's air wing, would lock onto its communication link and jam it mid-flight. Its communications network scrambled, the drone would simply drop down and crash on land. And here's the crazy part, this kind of skirmish would be routine. Since late 2023, the Houthis have turned the Red Sea into a shooting range. They've targeted commercial tankers, cargo ships, and even warships like the USS Carney, which intercepted multiple inbound missiles. Only the heaviest ships like the aircraft carriers were previously off-limits, and the most recent attacks in March showcase that even that is no longer the case. But is this an act of desperation or bravery? That might be up to you to decide. To help you with that, let's overview the defensive potential of an old US aircraft carrier. Let's get something straight, the USS Harry S. Truman isn't just a warship. It's a floating city built for war. This 100,000-ton nuclear-powered juggernaut is part of the Nimitz class of supercarriers, the pride of the US Navy. Over 3 football fields long, it can launch a fully loaded fighter jet every 25 seconds. It's more akin to a moving piece of sovereign US territory armed to the teeth and presenting its military prowess worldwide. On board are more than 5,000 sailors and air wing personnel, 90 aircraft, and enough firepower to knock out a small country's infrastructure. But what makes this carrier truly dangerous isn't just the missiles or the jets, it's the layers of defense and the coordination that bind them. Here's how it works. Layer 1 is the outer screen. Cruisers and destroyers escort the carrier, each equipped with the Aegis radar system and SM-series missiles. These ships are the first to detect, track, and eliminate threats before they even get close. Layer 2 is the inner shield. This includes short-range interceptors like the evolved Sea Sparrow missile, SM, designed for split-second reactions, and of course the legendary Phalanx CIWS turrets. These bad boys can lock onto and destroy something the size of a football flying at hundreds of miles per hour in the blink of an eye. Then there's the secret sauce, electronic warfare. It's not just about pulling the trigger, it's about ensuring the enemy can't even find you to retaliate. Jammers, decoys, radar-absorbing coatings, they all make the Truman a nightmare to target. Your drone might be airborne, but it'll have no idea where it's going, who it's talking to, or even what it's looking at. Yet the Truman's real superpower? Coordination. Everyone on board knows their role, from the radar techs buried deep inside the Combat Information Center to the yellow-shirted crew marshalling jets on the flight deck. Every second, every movement matters. And when those battle stations are called, the ship shifts into a different mode. Red lights flood the corridors, boots thunder down metal hallways, CIC monitors flash to life like Christmas trees, pilots sprint to their aircraft, weapons crews load sidewinders and harms. The flight deck operates like a high-speed, high-stakes ballet. However, here's the thing. Those drone attacks won't just be random. Ultimately, they are designed to probe defenses and test response times of both Israel and the US. Some would fly high, others go low, trying to find a hole in the Truman's armor which the Houthis and the rest of the axis of resistance could use to threaten the Navy. They are unlikely to find one. But where are the Houthis getting these flying threats? The answer shouldn't be surprising, as it's one of the countries that frequently pops up when there are signs of trouble in the Middle East: Iran. The Houthi rebels have been on the receiving end of Iranian drone tech and training for years. Their arsenal includes models like the Samad 3, a long-range drone that can fly over 1,000 miles, GPS-guided, with just enough explosive punch to cause real problems. It's effectively a poor man's cruise missile, and a counterpart to what the Ukrainians have been able to create in their own war against Russia, where you might even draw some parallels. Then there's the Kasef-1. Picture a flying grenade, cheap, expendable, and built for one thing: impact. These drones aren't precision tools, but are meant to sow chaos over long distances and indiscriminately cause destruction. The Houthis would know they can't go toe-to-toe with US firepower, so they're likely to go for unpredictability instead, launching swarms, flying low, striking at night, trying to sneak through radar nets. All of these drones will be struck down by the layers upon layers of defenses that the US Navy has made for its most valuable ships. But here's the kicker: the USS Harry S. Truman isn't even the most sophisticated aircraft carrier out there. The Truman is only a Nimitz-class carrier, with the lead ship Nimitz commissioned in 1975. For decades, the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier has been the gold standard of naval power. These massive, nuclear-powered ships have projected US influence across every ocean on Earth, functioning as mobile air bases capable of launching strikes, supporting humanitarian missions, and deterring adversaries just by showing up. And while the Houthis might not have the firepower to challenge even the Nimitz carrier and its cohort, naval warfare has changed on the whole. The threats are faster, smaller, and more networked, and so the response needs to be as well. That's where the Gerald R. Ford class comes in. While it shares the imposing silhouette of its predecessor, the Ford class is a complete overhaul, designed from the keel up to meet the demands of 21st century warfare. One of the most significant changes is how the aircraft are launched. Nimitz-class carriers use steam-powered catapults, a marvel of Cold War engineering, but one that comes with high maintenance and wear on aircraft. The Ford replaces those steam systems with EMALS, or the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. It's faster, smoother, and can launch both heavy fighters and lightweight drones with equal ease. That flexibility is crucial in an era where unmanned systems are becoming just as important as manned fighters. The Ford class also introduces the advanced arresting gear, replacing the hydraulic cables used on the Nimitz decks. It's more reliable and allows for a greater range of aircraft types to land safely, especially UAVs. Together, EMALS and AAG allow the Ford to launch and recover up to 33% more sorties per day than the Nimitz, a significant edge when you're in a high-tempo conflict zone. Then there's the power, literally. The Ford's 2 nuclear reactors produce more than double the electrical power of a Nimitz-class carrier. That's not just for propulsion, it opens the door for energy-hungry technologies like high-powered radar, electronic warfare systems, and even future directed energy weapons like lasers and railguns. Speaking of radar, the lead ship of the Ford class, the USS Gerald R. Ford, is equipped with the Navy's now retired dual-band radar system, which combined long-range surveillance and targeting into one highly automated package. Subsequent Ford-class carriers are receiving the newer Enterprise Air Surveillance Radar due to cost and reliability concerns. There's also a major shift in how the ship operates internally. The Ford was designed with automation and reduced manpower in mind. Compared to a Nimitz-class carrier, which typically requires a crew of over 5,000, the Ford can do more with about 600 fewer personnel. That's fewer sailors at risk in combat, less logistical burden, and lower operating costs across the ship's 50-year lifespan. And while both ships are built to survive the battle, the Ford class ups the game with improved armor layouts, internal redundancy, and better damage control systems. It's a more survivable platform, built to take hits and keep fighting in modern threat environments, whether that's drone swarms, hypersonic missiles, or cyber attacks. In the end, both carriers are unmatched symbols of power, but while the Nimitz class was built to rule the Cold War seas, the Ford class was built to dominate the digital battle space of tomorrow. It doesn't just launch aircraft, it launches a message. American sea power is evolving, and it's not slowing down. And remember, the US Navy considers the Houthis to be just annoying enough to actually send a Nimitz carrier into the Red Sea to launch devastating attacks and mount an impenetrable defense in turn. The US administration likely has considered using the Gerald R. Ford to be overkill, both in terms of offense and defense, but also possibly in terms of geopolitics. If the US Navy were to use a more advanced aircraft carrier to deal with the Houthis, it could actually embolden the entire movement. It would lend credence to the idea that Iranian proxies surrounding Israel are an actual, legitimate threat to the country and security in the region. While they certainly might be, their actual scope of operations is so small that the US is treating them slightly above traditional small-scale terrorist organizations. But the repeated attacks on Israel and the US Navy might have struck a chord with the administration of President Donald Trump, or perhaps even the president himself, so the US military started responding in turn. On March 15th, the same day the US strikes resumed in force, the Houthis launched one of their most aggressive multi-day barrages yet, targeting the USS Harry S. Truman with waves of drones and missiles over the next 48 hours. The initial wave was focused on dismantling the rebels' radar systems, air defenses, and launch sites for ballistic missiles and drones. These operations aimed to degrade the Houthis' capability to threaten maritime navigation and to send a clear message regarding the US commitment to safeguarding international waterways. The campaign involved multiple strikes over subsequent days, with significant engagements reported in the capital Sana'a and the port city of Al-Hodeida. Notably, on March 17th, US forces targeted a cotton processing plant in Zabid, which had been repurposed as a facility for manufacturing mines and explosive devices. The intensity of the strikes underscored the US intent to neutralize Houthi military assets comprehensively. However, the operation was not without controversy. Reports emerged of civilian casualties, including women and children, prompting international concern and criticism. The Houthi-controlled Health Ministry reported that the US strikes had resulted in the deaths of 59 individuals and injuries to 136 others by the end of March. These figures highlighted the complex nature of conducting military operations in densely populated areas and raised questions about the precision of the strikes. Ultimately, it's clear that the US won't tolerate the continued aggression from Iran or its many proxies scattered across the Middle East. Perhaps more importantly, the scale of the attacks from the Houthis, as well as their sheer inefficacy when it comes to actually making a dent in the US defenses, or indeed even creating something that can be reported to constitute an attack, shows the one-sided nature of the conflict between the superpower that is the US and the militia organization. This is best showcased through the attacks on the aircraft carriers that the Houthis supposedly launched from the middle of March onwards. None have managed to inflict any sort of real damage, and most of them completely missed the target. On the flip side, the US response has been precise and devastating, which in itself is starting to pose a few more questions. If the continued attacks on the Houthis are unable to quell the rebels, they would start constituting another humanitarian crisis that would undoubtedly fall on the US itself to solve. So the US needs to create a more unified approach to dealing with the rebels, and that could mean starting with the source, Iran. If Iran doesn't stop its aggressive posturing against Israel, the conflict in the Middle East has no chance of ending anytime soon. And given that more recent reports suggested that the country actually has the industrial and manufacturing capacities to create nuclear bomb material, the clock is ticking until those capacities become a reality. After that, all bets would be off, and the US would need to come in full force in earnest, triggering the same type of war that shook the region for 2 decades following the 9/11 attacks. But what do you think? Is the current US initiative against the Houthis enough to deter Iran? Let us know in the comments section below, and thank you for watching.